The first time I saw humans in combat, I thought they were insane. My name is Zephyr, and I serve as a tactical analyst for the Galactic Defense Coalition. For 3 centuries, I had studied warfare across 17 different species, cataloged their strengths and weaknesses, and developed strategies that had kept the peace for generations. Nothing in my extensive experience had prepared me for humanity. The emergency alert reached our command station on Kepler Prime at 3:47 Standard Galactic Time. The Vorth Empire, those metallic monstrosities that had terrorized the Outer Rim for decades, had broken through our defensive lines near the Centauri system. 3 coalition fleets had already fallen to their advanced weaponry and seemingly impenetrable armor. The situation was desperate. I was hunched over my analysis console, reviewing tactical data from the failed engagements, when Admiral Kexthara burst into the command center. Her 4 arms gestured wildly as she spoke, a sign of extreme agitation among her species. "Zephyr, we have a problem. High Command is sending in the humans." I looked up from my screens, confused. The humans? Admiral, with respect, they only joined the coalition 18 months ago. Their technology is primitive compared to ours. Their ships are barely faster than light, and their weapons are kinetic projectiles and crude energy beams. Sending them against the Vorth would be massacre. Admiral Kexthara's primary eyes fixed on mine, while her secondary eyes continued monitoring the tactical displays. Those are my thoughts exactly, but High Command believes they have some kind of strategic advantage, something about their unconventional approach to warfare. I pulled up the human fleet specifications on my console. What I saw made me even more concerned. 12 ships total, led by something called the UES Indomitable. The vessels looked crude and angular compared to the sleek, efficient designs favored by other coalition species. Their armor was thick but basic. Their weapons were projectile-based with some energy components, and their shields were generations behind current technology. "Admiral, this is suicide. The Vorth have plasma cannons that can punch through our best shields. Their armor can deflect our most advanced energy weapons. These human ships will be destroyed before they can even get within firing range." But even as I spoke, something nagged at the back of my mind. During the brief time humans had been coalition members, there had been odd reports about their military exercises. Other species officers who had observed human war games often came back with strange stories. They spoke of tactics that made no logical sense, of humans doing things that should have resulted in defeat but somehow led to victory. The communication array crackled to life, and a human voice filled the command center. It was rough and gravelly, with an accent I couldn't place. "Coalition Command, this is Admiral Sarah Chen of the United Earth Fleet. We're approaching the engagement zone. Request permission to implement our battle plan." Admiral Kexthara activated her communicator. "Admiral Chen, this is Admiral Kexthara. We're transmitting tactical data on Vorth capabilities. Recommend you maintain safe distance and provide support fire only." There was a pause, then something that sounded like laughter came through the comm system. "Appreciate the concern, Admiral, but we've got this. All coalition forces maintain position and observe. We'll have this cleaned up shortly." I exchanged glances with Admiral Kexthara. The human's confidence seemed completely divorced from reality. I quickly ran the numbers again. The Vorth fleet in the Centauri system consisted of 47 warships, including 3 of their massive dreadnoughts. Each dreadnought alone outmassed the entire human fleet. "Admiral Chen," I interjected, activating my own communicator, "this is Tactical Analyst Zephyr. The mathematical probability of success with your current force composition is less than 0.3%. Recommend immediate withdrawal and regrouping with larger coalition forces." Another pause, then the human's voice came back, warmer this time. "Zephyr, right? I've read your tactical analyses. Brilliant work on the hegemony campaign. But sometimes math doesn't tell the whole story. Trust me on this one." Before I could respond, the long-range sensors lit up. The human fleet had dropped out of faster-than-light travel at the edge of the Centauri system. I immediately switched the main display to show their approach vector, expecting to see them taking up a standard formation for long-range engagement. Instead, what I saw made no sense at all. The human fleet was accelerating directly toward the Vorth formation, not to an optimal firing position, not to a defensive stance, but straight at them. It was like watching someone charge a plasma cannon with a stick. "What are they doing?" Admiral Kexthara whispered. I frantically worked my console, trying to understand their strategy. The humans weren't even powering up their weapons. Their energy signatures showed they were diverting all power to engines and shields. They were going to ram the Vorth fleet. "This is madness," I muttered, but I couldn't look away. The Vorth, apparently as confused as we were, hesitated for a crucial few seconds before opening fire. Their plasma beams reached out across space, striking the lead human ships. I watched the energy readings spike as the human shields absorbed the hits. The shields held, but barely. More Vorth weapons fired, and this time I saw something extraordinary. Instead of trying to avoid the incoming fire, the human ships maneuvered to intercept it. Not in a defensive way, but as if they were deliberately drawing fire to specific ships. The UES Indomitable was taking hit after hit, its shields failing, armor beginning to buckle. "They're going to be destroyed," Admiral Kexthara said, her voice tight with tension. But then I noticed something else. While the Vorth were concentrating their fire on the lead human ships, the rest of the human fleet was spreading out in a pattern I'd never seen before. They weren't maintaining formation. They weren't providing covering fire. They were scattering like frightened animals. Except they weren't frightened. As I watched their energy signatures, I realized they were powering up systems I couldn't identify. Whatever they were doing, it wasn't in any tactical manual I'd ever studied. The first human ship reached the Vorth formation. Instead of ramming as I expected, it suddenly decelerated and opened fire. But these weren't the crude kinetic weapons I'd seen in their specifications. Streams of what looked like metallic projectiles erupted from the ship, but they moved in ways that defied physics. They curved around Vorth shields, struck from impossible angles, and seemed to multiply in flight. The Vorth ship that was hit didn't just take damage. It came apart, not from an explosion, but as if its very structure was being dissolved from within. "What kind of weapon is that?" Admiral Kexthara demanded. I was already pulling up every piece of intelligence we had on human technology, but I found nothing. These weapons weren't in any of their official specifications. Either they had been hiding their true capabilities, or they had developed something entirely new. More human ships reached the Vorth formation, and each one deployed the same impossible weapons. Vorth ships that had seemed invincible moments before were being torn apart with surgical precision. But it wasn't just the weapons. The humans were moving their ships in ways that shouldn't have been possible. They were treating the three-dimensional battlefield like they owned it, dancing between Vorth formations with an intuitive understanding of space combat that our best pilots took decades to develop. Then I saw something that changed everything. One of the Vorth dreadnoughts, a massive vessel bristling with weapons and armor thick enough to shrug off anything in our arsenal, turned its main cannon toward a human destroyer. The energy buildup was enormous. When that cannon fired, it would vaporize the human ship completely. The cannon fired. The human ship wasn't there. It hadn't moved faster than light. It hadn't activated any kind of cloaking device. One moment it was directly in the cannon's line of fire, and the next moment it was 5 kilometers to port, firing those strange, dissolving projectiles into the dreadnought's rear section. I realized then that I had been looking at this all wrong. I had been trying to understand human tactics through the lens of conventional warfare, but humans weren't fighting conventionally. They were fighting like the universe was a game, and they had figured out how to cheat. The battle lasted 17 minutes. When it was over, the entire Vorth fleet had been destroyed or disabled, and the humans hadn't lost a single ship. The UES Indomitable, which I had watched take hit after hit, was still operational despite its battered appearance. Admiral Chen's voice crackled over the communication system again. "Coalition Command, this is Admiral Chen. Centauri system is secure. Will remain on station until Coalition forces arrive for cleanup." Admiral Kexthara stared at the tactical display showing the aftermath of the battle. Debris from Vorth ships drifted in neat patterns, as if the humans had somehow controlled even their destruction. "Admiral Chen, how did you? What were those weapons?" "Classified, I'm afraid. But don't worry about the Vorth anymore. Word of this will spread. They won't be causing trouble in Coalition space again anytime soon." I found my voice. "Admiral Chen, this is Zefter. I need to ask for my tactical analysis. Those maneuvers your ships made, the way they avoided fire at the last second, how is that possible?" There was a longer pause this time. When Admiral Chen responded, her voice was thoughtful. "You know, Zefter, that's a good question. Most species think about space as empty. Humans think about space as an ocean, and humans have been sailing oceans for a very long time. The connection ended, leaving Admiral Kexthara and me staring at each other in stunned silence. I turned back to my console and began reviewing the battle footage, trying to understand what I had witnessed. The more I analyzed, the more questions arose. The human weapons weren't just advanced. They seemed to operate on principles that our science said were impossible. The way their ships moved suggested they understood something about the nature of space itself that we didn't, and their tactics implied a way of thinking about warfare that was completely alien to everything I knew. But the most disturbing realization was something Admiral Chen had said. Word of this would spread, and the Vorth wouldn't cause trouble again. That suggested this wasn't humanity's full capability. This was just a demonstration. Over the next several hours, as Coalition cleanup crews arrived at the battle site, reports started coming in from across the galaxy. The Vorth Empire was withdrawing from contested systems. Other hostile species were pulling back their forces. Pirates were abandoning their hideouts. The galaxy was reacting to humanity's first major military action like a kicked anthill, and everyone was running away. I spent days analyzing the battle footage, frame by frame. I studied energy readings, movement patterns, weapon signatures. Every piece of data only deepened the mystery. The humans had fought like they were playing by rules that only they knew, and they had won so decisively that it redefined what victory meant. But the real revelation came when I started researching human history. What I found in their databases made my blood run cold. Humans had been fighting wars against their own kind for their entire recorded history. Not skirmishes or territorial disputes like most species experienced during their development, but massive, total conflicts that consumed entire continents. They had weapons that could destroy their own planet several times over, yet they had chosen not to use them. They had fought in environments that would kill most other species outright. They had developed strategies for warfare that assumed their opponents would be as clever, as ruthless, and as innovative as they were. When other species joined the galactic community, they left their warlike past behind. Humans had joined the galactic community and brought their warlike past with them. They hadn't abandoned their capacity for violence. They had refined it. The universe had spent millennia developing civilized ways to resolve conflicts. Humans had spent the same time learning how to end conflicts permanently. Now they were here, offering their services to the Coalition, and I was beginning to understand why species across the galaxy were suddenly very interested in peaceful solutions to their problems. I filed my initial report on the Centauri engagement, but I knew it was incomplete. I had witnessed something that would change the balance of power in the galaxy, but I didn't yet understand what it meant. What I did know was that humanity hadn't joined the Coalition to learn from us. They had joined to teach us something. And the first lesson was simple. There were fates worse than defeat, and humanity knew what all of them were. The war against the Vorth Empire officially ended 3 days later when their high command sent an unconditional surrender to Coalition headquarters. They included a specific request that they be allowed to surrender to any Coalition species except the humans. That was when I truly began to understand. Humanity hadn't just won a battle. They had won without killing a single Vorth soldier. Every ship they had destroyed had been disabled, its crew left alive but stranded. The Vorth weren't surrendering because they couldn't win. They were surrendering because they were terrified of what humans might do if the war continued. As I prepared my final report on the engagement, I realized I was documenting more than a military victory. I was documenting the moment when the galaxy learned to fear again. And humanity, with their strange weapons and impossible tactics, had become the thing that went bump in the darkness of space. 3 weeks after the Centauri engagement, I received an assignment that would change everything I thought I knew about warfare. High Command had decided that someone needed to understand human military capabilities, and as the Coalition's primary tactical analyst, that someone was me. The transport ship that took me to Earth was uncomfortable by design. The Coalition had learned that humans preferred their environment slightly hostile compared to most civilized species. Higher gravity, more extreme temperatures, and atmospheric pressure that made my breathing apparatus work overtime. Even their passenger vessels seemed designed to remind occupants that space was trying to kill them. Captain Torres, the human officer who greeted me at the airlock, was nothing like Admiral Chen. Where Chen had projected confidence and control, Tors radiated something different. Danger, perhaps. She was smaller than most humans I had met, but she moved with a precision that suggested every motion was calculated for maximum efficiency. "Analyst Zefter," she said, offering me what humans called a handshake. Her grip was firm enough to crack my chitinous hand plates if she chose to apply pressure. "Welcome aboard the UES Persistence. Admiral Chen sends her regards." The ship itself was a revelation. Where coalition vessels prioritized comfort and efficiency, the Persistence was built like a weapon that humans happened to live inside. Every surface could serve a tactical purpose. Every corridor had multiple routes and emergency positions. The entire vessel was designed around the assumption that it would be boarded, damaged, and forced to fight while crippled. "Your ship is quite militaristic," I observed as Captain Tors led me through passages lined with what were obviously weapon storage points. "This is actually one of our civilian research vessels," Tors replied. "You should see our actual warships." My thorax plates shifted nervously. If this was their idea of civilian, I wasn't sure I wanted to understand their military philosophy. Tors led me to what she called the observation deck, a transparent dome that provided a panoramic view of space around us. But more importantly, it gave me my first look at Earth. The planet hung before us like a blue-white jewel, but as we drew closer, I began to see details that made me understand why humans were what they were. The surface showed clear signs of massive industrial activity, but it wasn't the orderly development I'd seen on other homeworlds. This looked like a planet that had been fought over, repeatedly and recently. "Beautiful, isn't she?" Tors said, watching my reaction. 7 billion of us down there, and we've been trying to kill each other for as long as we've had the imagination to do so." "But you've achieved peace now," I said. "You're part of the galactic community." Tors laughed, a sound that somehow contained no humor. "Peace? Analyst, we haven't had peace in 3,000 years. What we have is a very careful balance of mutually assured destruction. Every human on that planet knows that we're one bad decision away from turning our homeworld into a radioactive cinder. It keeps us focused." The shuttle bay we docked in could have housed a dozen coalition cruisers. As we disembarked, I saw humans working with machinery that seemed designed for rapid deployment and equally rapid destruction. Everything was modular, everything could be weaponized, and everything had backup systems for the backup systems. "Your people seem very prepared," I commented. "We have a saying," Tors replied as she led me through the bustling facility. "Hope for the best, plan for the worst, and always have an exit strategy. We learned that from about 10,000 years of fighting things that wanted to eat us." My escort assignment was handed off to Dr. Marcus Webb, a human xenobiologist who had been studying galactic species since first contact. He was older than most humans I had met, with gray streaking his hair and lines around his eyes that suggested he smiled often. But like every other human I'd encountered, there was something predatory in the way he assessed his surroundings. "So you want to understand how we fight," he said as we walked through what appeared to be a research complex. "That's interesting. Most species want to understand why we fight." "Is there a difference?" "Oh yes," Dr. Webb said, stopping before a large display showing what appeared to be historical battle footage. "How we fight is tactics and technology. Why we fight is philosophy, and philosophy is much more dangerous." The display activated, showing scenes from what Webb explained was human history. I watched in fascination and growing horror as primitive humans with crude weapons systematically dismantled enemies that should have overwhelmed them. They fought in environments that would kill most species. They used strategies that required accepting massive casualties to achieve victory. They turned every disadvantage into an advantage and every advantage into a weapon. "Your species seems to have an unusual relationship with death," I observed. "We do," Webb agreed. "Most species evolve in environments where the primary threat is scarcity, not enough food, not enough space, not enough resources. Humans evolved on a planet where everything was trying to kill us. Predators, weather, diseases, geological events, and eventually each other. We didn't learn to compete for resources. We learned to eliminate threats." He changed the display to show more recent conflicts. Human soldiers fighting in conditions that would be lethal to most coalition species, using weapons that seemed designed to maximize psychological impact rather than simple effectiveness. "The thing most species don't understand about human warfare," Webb continued, "is that we don't fight to win, we fight to end the fight, permanently." I thought about the Vorth surrender, how quickly they had capitulated after their first encounter with human tactics. You mean intimidation? I mean elimination of future threats, Webb corrected. When humans go to war, we don't just want to defeat our enemy. We want to make sure they never want to fight us again. And we want every other potential enemy to see what happens when you threaten us. The next few days were an intensive course in human military philosophy that left me fundamentally changed. Dr. Webb introduced me to concepts that had no direct translation into any coalition language. Deterrence theory, which assumed that the threat of massive retaliation could prevent conflicts before they started. Asymmetric warfare, which involved using unexpected methods to defeat superior forces. Escalation dominance, which meant always being prepared to take any conflict to a level where the enemy couldn't follow. But the most disturbing concept was something humans called total war. Most species fight for territory or resources, Webb explained as we stood in a museum dedicated to something called World War II. They have limited objectives and stop when those objectives are achieved. Humans developed the concept of fighting until the enemy's ability to make war was completely destroyed. The displays around us showed the aftermath of human conflicts. Entire continents reduced to rubble, weapons that could eliminate cities in seconds, industrial complexes dedicated entirely to producing tools of destruction. This is what happened when we fought ourselves, Webb said quietly. Imagine what happens when we fight someone else. That evening, I was introduced to General Patricia Hayes, the human officer responsible for military integration with coalition forces. She was younger than I had expected, but she carried herself with an authority that made other humans defer to her instinctively. Dr. Webb says you've been learning about our approach to warfare, she said as we sat in her office overlooking a training facility. Through the windows, I could see human soldiers practicing maneuvers that looked more like deadly dancing than military exercises. I've been learning that your species thinks about conflict differently than any other species in the galaxy, I replied. That's because conflict thinks about us differently, General Hayes said. Most species developed in environments where cooperation was the key to survival. Humans developed in an environment where everything was hostile. We learned to cooperate with each other so we could fight everything else. She activated a holographic display that showed galactic military deployments. Coalition forces were spread thin across hundreds of systems, maintaining peace through careful diplomacy and overwhelming numbers. But the human deployments were different. Small groups of ships positioned at strategic points, not to defend specific territories, but to be able to respond to threats anywhere in the galaxy. You don't have enough ships to defend all your interests, I observed. We don't defend, General Hayes replied. We hunt. The word sent a chill through my nervous system. Hunt. Every other species in the galaxy thinks defensively. They build walls and barriers and try to prevent threats from reaching them. Humans think offensively. We identify threats and eliminate them before they become problems. She changed the display to show recent military activities. Human ships moving through sectors where other species reported suspicious activity. Human intelligence operations identifying potential threats years before they developed into actual conflicts. Human diplomatic efforts that somehow convinced aggressive species to find peaceful solutions to their expansion plans. The Vorth Empire had been planning their expansion into coalition space for 15 years, General Hayes said. We knew about it 14 years ago. We spent the intervening time making sure that when they finally made their move, we would be ready to end their empire permanently. You've been manipulating galactic politics for years. We've been preventing galactic wars for years, she corrected. The Hegemony Uprising, the Sector 7 Rebellion, the Outer Rim Pirates, the Crystal Dynasty expansion, all of those were ended before they could begin because humans identified the threats and dealt with them. I stared at the display, realizing that dozens of conflicts I thought had been resolved through diplomacy or luck had actually been prevented by human intervention. The galaxy has no idea. The galaxy doesn't want to know, General Hayes said. Most species prefer to believe that peace is the natural state of the universe and that war is an aberration. Humans know better. Peace is what you have when everyone who might threaten it is either your ally or too afraid to fight you. That night, I lay in my assigned quarters trying to process what I had learned. The humans hadn't joined the coalition to contribute to galactic peace. They had joined to take responsibility for galactic security. They were positioning themselves as the ultimate deterrent, the force that other species would think twice about challenging. But more than that, they were reshaping the very nature of how conflicts were resolved. Instead of waiting for wars to start and then fighting them, humans were preventing wars by making sure potential aggressors understood the cost of aggression. The next morning, Dr. Webb took me to observe human military training exercises. What I saw confirmed my worst fears about human capabilities. Soldiers who could fight effectively in conditions that would incapacitate other species. Weapons that could adapt to any tactical situation. Most importantly, a command structure that could make decisions and implement them with a speed that made other military organizations look glacial. How do you coordinate so effectively? I asked as we watched a simulated battle where human forces adapted to changing conditions faster than the computer opponents could react. We train for chaos, Webb replied. Most military organizations train their soldiers to follow orders and execute plans. Human soldiers are trained to achieve objectives regardless of whether the plan survives contact with reality. I watched a squad of human soldiers encounter an unexpected obstacle in their simulation. Instead of calling for new orders, they immediately adapted their tactics, using the obstacle as cover while flanking around it. The entire maneuver was completed in less time than it would have taken most species to request new instructions. Your soldiers are trained to think independently. Our soldiers are trained to think like predators, Webb corrected. Every human soldier knows that their objective is to win, and they'll use whatever method achieves that objective. They don't need orders to tell them how to fight. They need objectives to tell them what to fight for. As we prepared for my return to Coalition headquarters, General Hayes provided me with a data package that she said contained everything the Coalition needed to know about human military capabilities. But she also gave me a warning. Analyst Zefter, I want you to understand something important. Humans didn't join the Coalition to conquer the galaxy. We joined to protect it. But that protection comes with a price. What price? The galaxy has to accept that some decisions about peace and war will be made by a species that actually understands both, she said. We won't ask permission to eliminate threats to galactic security. We won't debate the morality of preventing wars. And we won't apologize for doing what's necessary to keep the peace. The trip back to Coalition headquarters gave me time to prepare my report, but also time to realize that I was returning with information that would fundamentally change how the Coalition operated. Humans weren't just another member species with advanced military technology. They were a force of nature that had learned to wear a civilized face. More importantly, they had positioned themselves as the ultimate arbiters of galactic security, not through conquest or intimidation, but by making themselves indispensable to the peace they protected. Every species in the galaxy now had a choice: accept human protection and the conditions that came with it, or face the consequences of rejecting it. As our transport approached the Coalition headquarters, I realized that the galaxy I was returning to was not the same galaxy I had left. Humans had changed everything, not through force, but through the threat of force applied so precisely that most species would never realize how carefully their choices were being managed. The age of galactic innocence was over. The age of human protection had begun. And whether that was a blessing or a curse would depend entirely on whether the galaxy could accept that sometimes. Peace could only be maintained by those who truly understood war. 6 months after my return from Earth, the galaxy learned what human protection actually meant. The lesson came in the form of the Ashak Collective, a militant species from the galactic core that had been expanding aggressively for decades. They had subjugated 17 different species and were moving toward Coalition space with an armada that dwarfed anything we had seen since the Great War. I was in the Coalition Strategic Planning Center when the first reports came in. The Ashak had destroyed 3 outer colonies and were demanding the surrender of all Coalition territories in the Orion Arm. Their ultimatum was simple: submit or be exterminated. Admiral Kexthara convened an emergency session of the Military Council. Representatives from 12 species gathered around the holographic display showing Ashak fleet movements. The numbers were sobering: 2,000 warships, including massive fortress vessels that could devastate entire star systems. Our combined fleets can muster perhaps 800 ships, Admiral Kexthara announced. And our intelligence suggests the Ashak have weapons technology that surpasses our own. The Draconi representative, General Sethais, gestured with all four arms in agitation. We need to evacuate the outer systems and fall back to defensive positions around the core worlds. That would mean abandoning 15 billion coalition citizens, the Terran representative pointed out, including 3 entire species who have no other worlds to retreat to. I looked up from my tactical analysis console. The mathematical probability of successful defense with our current forces is less than 12%. Even with perfect coordination and optimal positioning, we simply don't have the firepower to stop an advance of this magnitude. There was silence around the table as the reality of the situation sank in. The coalition had maintained peace for centuries through diplomacy and the threat of collective action. But the Ashak weren't interested in negotiation, and collective action wasn't enough to stop them. Admiral Kexthara activated the communication system. "Get me Admiral Chen." The response came immediately, as if the humans had been waiting for the call. Admiral Chen appeared on the display, looking older and more tired than when I had last seen her, but her eyes held the same predatory intelligence that had unnerved me before. "Admiral Kexthara," she said without preamble, "we've been monitoring the situation. The Ashak Collective represents an existential threat to coalition security." "Can your forces assist in the defense?" Admiral Kexthara asked. "We can do better than that," Admiral Chen replied. "We can eliminate the threat permanently, but it will require full authorization from the Coalition Military Council." General Sethais leaned forward. "What kind of authorization?" "Permission to engage the Ashak Collective with all necessary force," Admiral Chen said. "No restrictions on methodology or scope of response." The words sent a chill through me. I remembered General Hayes' warning about how humans approached threats to galactic security. "Admiral Chen, when you say all necessary force, what exactly are you requesting?" Admiral Chen's expression didn't change. "Analyst Zefter, I'm requesting permission to end the Ashak Collective's ability to threaten anyone ever again." The silence that followed was deafening. Every member of the military council understood the implications of what Admiral Chen was proposing, but none of us wanted to be the first to say it aloud. Finally, the Vulcani representative spoke. "Admiral, are you suggesting the complete elimination of an entire species?" "I'm suggesting the complete elimination of a threat to galactic peace," Admiral Chen replied. "How that's achieved depends on how the Ashak respond to our initial contact." Admiral Kexthara's primary eyes focused on the display. "What do you need from us?" "Stand back and let us work," Admiral Chen said, "and be prepared to accept the consequences of what comes next." The authorization vote was closer than I expected. 7 species voted in favor of giving humans complete freedom of action. 3 voted against. 2 abstained. I found myself wondering if we had just signed the death warrant for an entire civilization, or if we had finally found a solution to the endless cycle of galactic conflicts. Admiral Chen's fleet departed for Ashak space 48 hours later. Unlike the force that had engaged the Vorth, this was clearly a military expedition designed for total war. 60 ships, including vessels I had never seen before. The energy signatures alone suggested weapons technology that was decades beyond what humans had officially admitted to possessing. But more disturbing than the ships themselves was the way they moved. Human fleets had always been precise and coordinated, but this formation moved like a single organism. Every ship maintained perfect position relative to every other ship, and the entire formation shifted and adapted to changing conditions with a fluid grace that suggested they weren't just communicating, they were thinking collectively. "How do they coordinate so perfectly?" Admiral Kexthara asked as we watched the fleet disappear into faster-than-light travel. I had been wondering the same thing. I believe they're using some form of quantum entanglement communication system. It would allow instantaneous coordination across any distance. "That technology is theoretical," General Sethais protested. "The engineering challenges alone would require decades of development." "Unless you started developing it decades ago," I replied, remembering the pattern of human technological development. They never revealed capabilities until they needed to use them. The first reports from Ashak space arrived 18 hours after the human fleet reached their territory. What we learned changed everything we thought we knew about the nature of conflict. The humans hadn't attacked the Ashak fleet. They had made contact with the Ashak government directly and requested a meeting to discuss terms. The Ashak, confident in their overwhelming numerical superiority, agreed to negotiations. Admiral Chen met with the Ashak High Command on their primary battle station, a massive fortress that served as the command center for their entire military operation. The meeting lasted exactly 17 minutes. When Admiral Chen left the battle station, she transmitted a message to both the Ashak fleet and Coalition headquarters. The Ashak Collective has been offered the opportunity to withdraw from Coalition space and limit their expansion to uninhabited systems. They have declined this offer. They have also been offered the opportunity to surrender and submit to Coalition justice. They have declined this offer as well. As of this moment, the Ashak Collective has chosen to continue their aggressive actions against Coalition citizens. I am hereby implementing the final option. What happened next redefined my understanding of human capabilities. The human fleet didn't attack the Ashak Armada. Instead, they deployed weapons that I can only describe as reality manipulators. Space around each Ashak ship began to distort, as if the fundamental laws of physics were being rewritten. Ships that had been designed to withstand any conventional attack found themselves disintegrating as their molecular bonds simply stopped working. But that wasn't the most terrifying part. The most terrifying part was that the humans were doing this selectively. Military vessels were destroyed completely. Civilian ships were disabled and left intact. Government installations were eliminated, but population centers were untouched. The humans were dismantling the Ashak Collective's ability to make war while leaving their ability to make peace completely intact. Within 6 hours, the entire Ashak military had ceased to exist. 2,000 ships, hundreds of military installations, and the political structure that had supported their expansion were simply gone. But Ashak civilians were unharmed, and Ashak colonies continued to function normally. Admiral Chen transmitted one final message to the surviving Ashak population. The Ashak Collective is hereby disbanded. Your species is welcome to apply for coalition membership under standard protocols. Any attempt to rebuild military forces beyond those necessary for self-defense will result in permanent solutions. The message was broadcast throughout Ashak space and to every species in the galaxy. Within hours, 12 different aggressive species announced their intention to pursue peaceful expansion only. 3 pirate organizations dissolved themselves completely. The Hegemony Remnants, a group that had been planning a resurgence for years, publicly abandoned their military objectives. Admiral Chen's fleet returned to Coalition space, but the ships that came back were different from the ones that had left. They were smaller somehow, as if part of their mass had simply disappeared. The energy signatures were completely different. Whatever weapons they had used against the Ashak, they were no longer carrying them. I requested a debriefing with Admiral Chen when her fleet reached Coalition headquarters, but I was told that human military operations were classified at levels above my clearance. Instead, I received a written report that contained more questions than answers. The report described the Ashak Collective's elimination as a surgical removal of aggressive capabilities while preserving civilian infrastructure. It mentioned selective application of advanced physics manipulation and targeted disruption of military-industrial complexes, but it provided no technical details about how any of this had been achieved. Dr. Webb arrived at Coalition headquarters 3 days later, ostensibly to assist with integration of former Ashak territories into the Coalition. But I suspected he was really there to help us understand what had happened. The thing you have to understand about human military philosophy, he explained during our private meeting, is that we don't just plan for the wars we're fighting. We plan for the wars we might have to fight in the future. You're saying this was all planned in advance. I'm saying that humans identified the Ashak as a potential threat 15 years ago, and we've been preparing for this specific conflict ever since, Webb replied. The weapons we used weren't developed in response to their aggression. They were developed in anticipation of it. I thought about the implications of that statement. How many other potential threats have you identified? All of them, Webb said simply. Every aggressive species, every expansionist empire, every potential source of galactic instability has been analyzed and categorized. We have specific response protocols for each of them. and weapons designed to counter each specific threat. We have solutions designed to resolve each specific problem, Webb corrected. Sometimes the solution is diplomatic, sometimes it's economic, sometimes it's technological assistance, and sometimes it's what happened to the Ashak. That evening, I found myself reviewing intelligence reports from across the galaxy, looking for patterns I had missed. What I found was disturbing. Every major conflict in the past decade had ended in ways that favored coalition interests. Every aggressive species that had threatened galactic stability had found reasons to pursue peaceful solutions. Every potential war had been prevented before it could begin. The humans hadn't just joined the coalition to contribute to galactic peace. They had taken control of galactic peace by making themselves responsible for preventing galactic wars. And they had been doing it so subtly that no one had noticed until they demonstrated what happened when subtle methods weren't sufficient. But the most disturbing realization was that the weapons they had used against the Ashak weren't their most advanced technology. They were the weapons humans were willing to use in public. The fact that they had made those weapons disappear immediately after using them suggested that they had capabilities they weren't ready to reveal. Admiral Kexthara found me in my office 3 days later, reviewing tactical analyses that seemed increasingly meaningless. "Zefter, I need your assessment of our current strategic position." I looked up from my console. "Admiral, I'm not sure our traditional strategic models apply anymore. The humans have changed the fundamental nature of galactic conflict." "How so?" "They've made war obsolete," I said. "Not by eliminating the causes of conflict, but by making the consequences of aggression so severe that no rational species would consider them acceptable." Admiral Kexthara's secondary eyes focused on the tactical displays, showing current fleet positions throughout the galaxy. Coalition forces were returning to normal patrol patterns, but human ships remained positioned at strategic points that would allow them to respond to any threat within hours. "Do you think they're a threat to coalition independence?" she asked. I considered the question carefully. "I think they're a threat to coalition illusions," I replied. "We've spent centuries believing that peace was maintained through mutual cooperation and shared interests. The humans have shown us that peace is maintained by someone being willing and able to enforce it." "And you think that someone should be the humans?" "I think that someone already is the humans," I corrected. "The question is whether the rest of the galaxy can accept that reality." Over the following weeks, reports came in from former Ashak territories. The transition to coalition membership was proceeding smoothly, almost suspiciously so. Former Ashak colonies were enthusiastically embracing coalition law and customs. Former Ashak military personnel were requesting transfers to non-combat positions. The entire species seemed eager to demonstrate their commitment to peaceful coexistence. But I noticed something else in the reports. References to human advisors assisting with the transition process. Mentions of human specialists helping to redesign former military installations for civilian purposes. Brief notes about human cultural exchanges that seemed designed to educate former Ashak citizens about the benefits of peaceful cooperation. The humans weren't just eliminating threats to galactic peace. They were converting those threats into contributors to galactic stability. They had turned the Ashak from an existential danger to the coalition into one of its most grateful members. As I prepared my final assessment of the Ashak situation, I realized that I was documenting more than a military victory or even a strategic transformation. I was documenting the emergence of a new galactic order where peace was guaranteed not by the goodwill of all participants, but by the overwhelming capability of one participant to ensure that goodwill was the only viable option. The humans had become the apex predators of galactic civilization, and like all apex predators, they were reshaping their entire ecosystem simply by existing within it. 1 year after the Ashak Collective's transformation, I received a priority summons that would reveal the ultimate purpose behind humanity's integration into galactic society. The message was marked with security classifications I had never seen before, and it came directly from Admiral Chen herself. The meeting location was a human research facility in the Tau Ceti system, officially listed as an agricultural development station. When my transport arrived, I discovered that agriculture was apparently a very heavily armed profession according to human standards. The facility was surrounded by defensive installations that could have protected a small planet, and the ships in orbit were clearly military vessels despite their civilian designations. Admiral Chen met me at the docking bay personally, another first in our professional relationship. She looked older than when I had last seen her, and there was something in her expression that suggested the weight of knowledge she wished she didn't possess. "Analyst Zefter," she said, leading me through corridors that hummed with activity I couldn't identify. "Thank you for coming. There are some things you need to understand about humanity's role in the galaxy." "I thought I already understood that role," I replied. "You're the enforcer of galactic peace." "That's what we want everyone to think," Admiral Chen said, "but it's not the whole truth." She led me to a secure briefing room deep within the facility. The walls were lined with displays showing star maps unlike any I had ever seen. These weren't standard navigational charts or territorial boundaries. These were threat assessment grids showing something massive moving through space beyond the galaxy's edge. Dr. Webb was waiting in the briefing room, along with several other humans I didn't recognize. But what caught my attention immediately was the presence of three non-human figures who weren't from any species I knew. They were tall, elegant beings with features that seemed both ancient and artificial. "Analyst Zefter," Admiral Chen said, "meet the predecessors." I stared at the alien figures, my mind struggling to process what I was seeing. The predecessors were legendary, a mythical race that was supposed to have vanished from the galaxy millions of years ago. According to galactic folklore, they had been the first intelligent species to achieve faster-than-light travel, and they had left behind only ruins and mysteries. "They're real," I managed to say. One of the predecessors stepped forward, moving with a grace that suggested they existed slightly outside normal space-time. When they spoke, their voice resonated directly in my mind rather than through my auditory systems. "We are real and we are dying," the being said. "Our name is Threshold and we speak for what remains of our civilization." Admiral Chen activated the wall displays, and suddenly I was looking at images that redefined my understanding of the universe. Star systems consumed by something that wasn't darkness but wasn't light either. Entire sectors of space where reality itself seemed to have been edited out of existence. And moving through it all, shapes that hurt to look at directly. "The Devourers," Dr. Webb said quietly. "They're what killed the predecessor civilization, and they're coming back." I found myself unable to speak as the implications crashed over me. The predecessors hadn't vanished or transcended to a higher plane of existence. They had been hunted to near extinction by something so terrible that even their advanced civilization couldn't survive it. "The Devourers exist partially outside normal space-time," Threshold explained. "They consume not just matter and energy, but the fundamental structure of reality itself. Every galaxy they pass through ceases to exist, not just physically, but conceptually." Admiral Chen manipulated the displays to show tracking data. "They're approximately 50,000 years away from our galaxy, moving at a rate that defies our understanding of physics. When they arrive, everything we know, everything we've built, everything we are will simply stop existing." "But you have a plan," I said, because that was the only thing that made sense. Humans always had a plan. "We have the beginning of a plan," Admiral Chen corrected. "The predecessors have been preparing for the Devourer's return for millions of years. They've seeded technologies and knowledge throughout the galaxy, waiting for a species to emerge that could use their preparations effectively." Dr. Webb leaned forward. "The thing is, most species that achieve galactic civilization do so through cooperation and peaceful development. They lack the aggressive creativity necessary to fight something like the Devourers." "But humans developed differently," I said, understanding beginning to dawn. "Humans developed as apex predators on a world that was constantly trying to kill them," Admiral Chen confirmed. "We evolved the ability to fight threats that were bigger, stronger, and better adapted than we were. More importantly, we evolved the willingness to do whatever was necessary to eliminate existential threats." Threshold gestured, and new images appeared on the displays. Technologies that seemed to blend physics and something beyond physics. Weapons that could manipulate the fundamental forces that held reality together. Ships that could exist in multiple dimensions simultaneously. "The predecessor technologies we've been studying," Dr. Webb continued, "require a specific mindset to operate effectively. They're not tools that can be used by peaceful, cooperative civilizations. They're weapons that can only be wielded by a species that understands warfare at the deepest level. I stared at the images, finally understanding why humans had seemed so impossible to categorize. You've been preparing to fight the Devourers since you joined the Coalition. We've been preparing to fight the Devourers since we first made contact with the predecessors, Admiral Chen said. That was about 200 years ago, shortly after we achieved faster-than-light travel. They approached us because they recognized something in human nature that they needed. What did they recognize? The willingness to burn down the universe to save it, Threshold said. Most species, when faced with an existential threat, attempt to preserve what they can. Humans prepare to sacrifice everything they care about if that's what's required for victory. Admiral Chen activated another display showing human military development over the past 2 centuries. Every advancement, every technological breakthrough, every strategic innovation had been designed with one purpose: preparing for a war against enemies that existed outside normal reality. The weapons we used against the Ashak were prototypes, she explained. Basic applications of predecessor technology designed to test our ability to manipulate fundamental forces. The real weapons are still in development. How real are we talking about? I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted to know the answer. Dr. Webb exchanged glances with Admiral Chen. We're developing the ability to weaponize causality itself, to create weapons that can erase things from existence by making them never have existed in the first place. The casual way he described reality-altering weapons sent chills through my nervous system. That sounds dangerous beyond calculation. It is, Admiral Chen agreed. But the alternative is the complete cessation of existence for every living thing in the galaxy. The Devourers don't just kill civilizations. They eliminate them so thoroughly that there's no trace they ever existed. Threshold gestured again, and the displays showed galactic surveys from millions of years ago. Entire spiral arms that were marked as containing advanced civilizations, but which were now empty space. Not destroyed space, but space that had never contained anything at all. This is what the Devourers do, Threshold explained. They don't just consume matter and energy, they consume history itself. Civilizations that resist them are edited out of the universal timeline as if they never existed. But you survived, I pointed out. We survived by fragmenting ourselves across multiple dimensions and timeline branches, Threshold said. We exist now only as echoes of what we once were, preserved in spaces between realities. It is not survival in any meaningful sense. Admiral Chen stood and walked to a viewport that showed the stars beyond the facility. The Coalition species represent the last hope for our galaxy's continued existence, but they can't fight this war as they are. They lack the psychological framework necessary to use predecessor weapons effectively. So humans will fight the war for them. Humans will become capable of fighting the war for them, Dr. Webb corrected. The process requires modifications to human psychology and physiology. We're developing soldiers who can exist partially outside normal space-time, who can think in ways that allow them to wield reality-altering weapons without losing their sanity. The implications of what he was describing terrified me. You're creating humans who aren't entirely human anymore. We're creating humans who can save humanity, Admiral Chen said firmly, and every other species in the galaxy. Threshold moved closer, and I could feel their presence like a weight in my mind. There is something you must understand, Analyst Zefter. The war against the Devourers cannot be fought according to conventional moral frameworks. It will require actions that peaceful civilizations would consider unthinkable. What kind of actions? Admiral Chen returned to the briefing table. We may need to sacrifice entire star systems to create weapons capable of hurting the Devourers. We may need to deliberately destabilize sections of space-time to deny them stable reality to consume. We may need to use coalition worlds as bait to draw them into traps. The cold calculation in her voice made me understand why the predecessors had chosen humans for this task. Any other species would have spent decades debating the ethics of such strategies. Humans had analyzed the costs and benefits and made their decision. The Coalition will never agree to such strategies, I said. The Coalition will never be asked, Dr. Webb replied. By the time the Devourers arrive, humanity will have the capability to fight them without requiring coalition approval or assistance. You're planning to take control of the galaxy's defense. We're planning to take responsibility for the galaxy's survival, Admiral Chen corrected. There's a difference. Threshold gestured one final time, and the displays showed something that made my blood freeze. A timeline projection showing the Devourer's arrival in 50,000 years, followed by humanity's response. The human strategy involved weapons that could tear holes in reality itself, tactics that required sacrificing entire sectors of the galaxy, and a final confrontation that would reshape the fundamental nature of existence. The war will last approximately 3,000 years, Threshold explained. If humanity succeeds, the galaxy will survive but will be fundamentally changed. If humanity fails, the galaxy will cease to have ever existed. Admiral Chen deactivated the displays and turned to face me directly. Analyst Zefter, you now understand why humans joined the coalition. We didn't come to learn from galactic civilization. We came to prepare galactic civilization for what's coming. By taking control of it. By protecting it from the knowledge of what protection requires, she said. The coalition species are good people who have built a peaceful society. They deserve to continue existing in that peaceful society for as long as possible before the war begins. Dr. Webb leaned back in his chair. In 50,000 years, when the Devourers arrive, humanity will have become something else entirely. We'll be the species that stands between the galaxy and extinction, regardless of what that transformation costs us. And until then, we maintain the illusion that the universe is a safe place where conflicts can be resolved through diplomacy and cooperation, Admiral Chen said. We handle the threats that would shatter that illusion, and we prepare for the threat that will end everything if we're not ready for it. As I prepared to leave the facility, Threshold approached me one final time. Analyst Zefter, you have been shown these truths because your species will play an important role in the preparations to come. Your analytical capabilities will be necessary for optimizing our strategies. What role? I asked. You will help us determine which aspects of galactic civilization are worth preserving and which must be sacrificed for the greater good, Threshold replied. It is not a burden we would place on humanity alone. The transport back to Coalition headquarters gave me time to process what I had learned. Humanity hadn't just become the galaxy's protector. They had become the galaxy's judge, jury, and executioner, making decisions about survival and sacrifice that would determine the fate of every living being in existence. But more than that, they had accepted the responsibility of becoming something monstrous so that everything else could remain innocent. They were preparing to fight a war that would require them to abandon their own humanity to preserve everyone else's right to exist. As I watched the stars pass by the viewport, I realized that the galaxy I thought I knew was already gone. In its place was a carefully maintained illusion of peace and safety, protected by a species that was quietly transforming itself into something capable of fighting gods and demons and forces that existed beyond the boundaries of comprehensible reality. The humans were becoming the monsters so that no one else would have to. 10 years after learning about the Devourers, I found myself standing in the observation deck of humanity's most classified facility, watching the birth of gods. The Prometheus station orbited a star that existed in 17 different dimensions simultaneously, and the humans working within it were no longer entirely recognizable as the species that had joined the coalition decades ago. The invitation to witness the final phase of humanity's transformation had come directly from Admiral Chen, though she was no longer Admiral Chen in any meaningful sense. The woman who greeted me at the station's docking bay had Chen's memories and Chen's voice, but her eyes held depths that extended beyond normal spacetime, and when she moved, reality seemed to bend slightly around her. Analyst Zefter, she said, and her words carried harmonics that resonated in dimensions I couldn't perceive. Thank you for coming. There are final preparations you need to witness before the project enters its ultimate phase. The station itself was an impossibility. Corridors that led to rooms larger than the structure that contained them. Laboratories where humans worked with equations that existed in mathematical spaces beyond conventional physics. Observation windows that showed not just the space around the station, but the space that would exist around the station in possible futures. How many humans are involved in this project? I asked as we walked through sections that seemed to exist in multiple realities simultaneously. All of them, Chen replied. Every human being who has ever lived is now part of the collective consciousness we've developed to fight the devourers. The barriers between individual minds became irrelevant when we began working with technologies that require multidimensional thinking. We entered what Chen called the primary observatory, a vast chamber that provided a view into the space between galaxies where the devourers were approaching. What I saw there challenged my understanding of existence itself. The devourers weren't ships or creatures in any conventional sense. They were holes in reality itself, moving wounds in the fabric of existence that consumed not just matter and energy, but the fundamental laws that allowed matter and energy to exist. Watching them was like staring into the concept of nothing, and my mind recoiled from the implications of their approach. They've accelerated, Chen observed, her voice carrying no emotion despite the catastrophic nature of what she was reporting. Our estimates were incorrect. They'll arrive in 37,000 years instead of 50,000. That's still an enormous amount of time. Not for what we need to accomplish, Chen replied. Creating weapons that can damage enemies who exist partially outside reality requires rethinking the fundamental nature of existence itself. We're not just building tools of war. We're rewriting the basic laws of physics. She gestured to displays that showed the current state of human development. What I saw was both magnificent and horrifying. Humans were no longer constrained by individual bodies or minds. They existed as interconnected consciousnesses that could manifest in physical form when necessary, but their true existence was spread across multiple dimensions and timeline branches. The Coalition still sees us as we were, Chen continued. That illusion becomes more difficult to maintain with each passing year, but it's necessary. The truth would shatter every peaceful civilization in the galaxy. What is the truth? The truth is that we've become something that never existed before in this universe, Chen said. We're a species that chose to evolve beyond biological limitations to fight enemies that exist beyond physical constraints. We've become living weapons designed to battle forces that threaten the continuation of existence itself. She led me to another observation window, this one showing human military installations throughout the galaxy. But these weren't the facilities I had visited years ago. These were structures that phased in and out of visible reality, existing in the spaces between dimensions where they could develop weapons too dangerous to test in normal space-time. Every major stellar phenomenon in the galaxy is now under our control, Chen explained. Supernovas, black holes, neutron star collisions, galactic core eruptions, we've learned to weaponize cosmic forces that can affect reality at the fundamental level. The casual way she described controlling forces that could reshape entire sectors of space made me understand how far humanity had progressed beyond their original nature. What happens to the Coalition when the Devourers arrive? The Coalition will be preserved, Chen said, but something in her tone suggested the word preserved had a meaning I wouldn't like. We've developed technology that can place entire civilizations in protected dimensional pockets where they can continue to exist regardless of what happens in baseline reality. You're talking about removing the Coalition from normal existence. We're talking about ensuring that peaceful civilizations have the opportunity to continue being peaceful civilizations, Chen corrected. The war against the Devourers will require reshaping the galaxy into something unrecognizable. Stars will be turned into weapons. Planets will be converted into ammunition. Space itself will become a battlefield where the laws of physics are constantly changing. She activated a holographic projection that showed the galaxy as it would exist during the war against the Devourers. Instead of the elegant spiral structure I knew, it was a geometric nightmare of overlapping dimensions and weaponized stellar phenomena. Every star system had been converted into some form of cosmic artillery. Every black hole had been turned into a reality manipulation device. The entire galaxy had become a single vast weapon, designed to fight enemies that existed outside normal causality. What about the humans who remain in baseline reality? There won't be any, Chen said. By the time the Devourers arrive, every human consciousness will exist primarily in the spaces between realities. We'll be able to manifest physical forms when necessary, but our true existence will be beyond the reach of any force that operates within normal space-time. The implications of what she was describing were staggering. You're talking about the extinction of humanity as a biological species. We're talking about the evolution of humanity into something capable of ensuring that every other species in the galaxy doesn't face extinction, Chen replied. It's a fair trade. She led me to the station's central chamber, where the final phase of humanity's transformation was taking place. What I witnessed there would haunt me for the rest of my existence. Thousands of humans were connected to machinery that existed in multiple dimensions simultaneously. Their consciousness was being uploaded, edited, and distributed across reality matrices that allowed them to think and act on scales that encompassed entire galaxies. They were becoming living embodiments of cosmic forces. Individual minds expanded to comprehend threats that existed beyond the boundaries of conventional existence. Each of these individuals will become responsible for defending multiple galaxies, Chen explained. They'll have the capability to manipulate fundamental forces, rewrite physical laws, and create or destroy entire universes if necessary. And they're volunteers. Every human who has ever lived volunteered for this transformation, Chen said. We achieved perfect genetic memory reconstruction several years ago. Every human consciousness that ever existed has been restored and given the choice to participate in our ultimate defense of existence itself. I watched as one of the transformation processes completed. The human who emerged from the machinery looked the same, but when they spoke, their words carried the weight of cosmic authority. The Andromeda sector has been prepared for defensive modification, they reported. Stellar engineering is complete and dimensional anchors are in place, ready for final weaponization on command. Chen nodded. Excellent. Begin implementation of the Cassandra protocol. If the Devourers attempt to approach through that vector, we'll be ready. The transformed human acknowledged the order and disappeared, not by walking away, but by simply ceasing to exist in this particular dimension while continuing to exist in dozens of others simultaneously. How long until the transformation is complete? I asked. It's already complete, Chen replied. What you're witnessing now is just the final integration phase. Humanity as a species ceased to exist in any conventional sense approximately 3 years ago. What remains are the tools we've created to fight the ultimate war. She led me to one final observation point that showed the current state of the galaxy from humanity's perspective. It was beautiful and terrifying in equal measure. Every star was connected to every other star through networks of dimensional manipulation technology. Every planet was monitored by consciousness entities that could respond to any threat within microseconds. Every potentially dangerous cosmic phenomenon was under active human control. The galaxy is now a fortress designed to protect itself, Chen said. And we are the fortress's guardians, forever watching the darkness beyond for threats that could end everything. What happens after the Devourers are defeated? If we defeat the Devourers, we'll face the question of what to do with the power we've accumulated, Chen said. Beings capable of rewriting physical laws and creating universes don't easily return to peaceful civilian life. The implications of that statement were clear. Even if humanity saved the galaxy from the Devourers, the galaxy would never be free from the consequences of what humanity had become to save it. And if you fail? If we fail, the question becomes irrelevant, Chen replied. Everything that has ever existed will cease to have ever existed, and there will be nothing left to ask questions about anything. As my visit to Prometheus Station concluded, Chen provided me with one final revelation that put everything into perspective. Analyst Zefter, there's something you need to understand about the timeline we're operating on. The transformation of humanity, the preparation of the galaxy's defenses, the development of reality-altering weapons, all of this is happening simultaneously across multiple timeline branches. What does that mean? It means that from our perspective, the war against the Devourers has already begun, Chen explained. We're fighting battles in possible futures while preparing defenses in the current timeline. Some versions of humanity have already faced the Devourers and won. Others have faced them and lost. We're using knowledge from all those timeline branches to optimize our chances in this one. The casual way she discussed fighting wars across multiple realities made me understand that humanity had long ago passed beyond anything the Coalition could comprehend or contain. Why are you telling me this? Because your species will need to make a choice soon, Chen said. The illusion of peaceful galactic civilization becomes harder to maintain as our preparations intensify. Eventually, the Coalition will need to know that their protectors have become something that exists beyond their understanding. What choice? Whether to trust us completely or to attempt resistance, Chen replied. Both options are acceptable to us, but the choice will determine how the Coalition experiences the final phase of preparation. As I boarded the transport that would take me back to Coalition space, I realized that I was leaving behind not just a space station, but an entirely different version of reality. The humans had become something that could no longer be categorized using conventional concepts of species, civilization, or individual identity. They had become the universe's immune system, a force of nature disguised as a political entity. And they had done it all to preserve the right of every other species to continue believing that the universe was a safe place where good intentions and peaceful cooperation were sufficient to ensure survival. The galaxy I returned to was the same galaxy I had left, but my knowledge of what lay beneath its peaceful surface was forever changed. Every coalition meeting I attended, every diplomatic protocol I analyzed, every peaceful resolution I witnessed was now understood as theater, a carefully maintained performance designed to preserve the illusion of normalcy while cosmic forces prepared for a war that would determine whether existence itself would continue. The humans had won their ultimate victory before firing a single shot. They had become indispensable to galactic survival while ensuring that galactic civilization would never understand what survival actually required. In the end, I realized that was perhaps the most human thing about them. Even after transcending every limitation of biology, individual identity, and physical existence, they were still protecting others from truths too terrible to bear. They had become gods so that everyone else could remain innocents, and they would carry that burden across multiple timelines and dimensions for as long as existence itself needed protection. The universe was safe because humanity had chosen to become the kind of monster that even cosmic horrors would fear to face. And the greatest tragedy was that no one except a handful of analysts like me would ever know the price they had paid to keep the stars shining and the galaxies spinning in their ancient, peaceful dance through the darkness of space.